Let's go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Kasket now.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm Elaine Kasket. I have been studying death in the digital in various ways since 2005 or so, initially from a psychological perspective, but since then quite multidisciplinary. I'm also a professor of psychology at University of Wolverhampton, where I'm primarily associated with the cyber psychology research cluster. And I wrote a book about this stuff called All the Ghosts in the Machine, which some of you might have encountered. I'm going to say, just because I've partially been asked to sort of think about the bereaved, which I didn't really do so much in my video, I'm just going to say a couple words about that here and fold it into an argument that you might recognize from the video. One of the primary impacts of our modern technological infrastructure, which is so heavily centralized and commercially driven, is that the data of the dead can't be treated as independent from the data of the living. So for me, the question is not whether the dead do or should have postmortem privacy, but rather how their data should be managed so that the rights and the interests of the living aren't impinged upon. But this does not mean, to my mind, however, that central platforms controlling our data should attempt to control for our individual memories or our individual experience, to include grief. So with respect to individual and collective memory, the record is not the memory is not the record. Both, like grief itself, are social and contextual and interpretative. And several dead grief concepts are seeing a very enthusiastic, I think, digital age revival, that there is an ideal way to grieve, that technology can help or hinder grief, and that we should control the impact of technology on the bereaved. So the idea that there's an ideal way to grieve shapes, reinforces, and creates norms and expectations. The idea that technology can help or hinder grief is a kind of causality trap, forgetting that grief is fundamentally social and contextual and interpretive, and assuming a kind of monolithic tech or reducible, predictable impact of tech. And the idea that technology should endeavor to control our experience and steward our information, or technology companies should, implies that we're passive, non-agentic grievers, that we're not capable as authors of our own kind of memory and experience. So I would argue that it's not only technology companies' job to control for our grief, or as bereaved persons, is actually not in their gift. So questions I really want to pose for others in the seminar session today. In our centralized surveillance-oriented state, we've conceded control of our personal data, or it's been extracted from us. And many social media platforms have moved to default memorialization, Twitter most recently. So should such platforms as that, social media platforms, be expected to assume responsibility for attention and control of data, ostensibly in service of memory, emotional experience such as grief, or as an archive, as human behavior? I think the reason the historical record on Facebook is an archive, and this gets to a question posed by Carl for our session later too as well, troubles me partly because of its dominance, and also that they're creating the norms and behaviors that they hope to see in the world. I'm struck by BJ Fogg's lab at Stanford, which is so influential in Silicon Valley. It's called the Behavior Design Lab. And with any archive, you have archivists, and history is always authored by historians, and memory is everybody's responsibility, although not everyone gets an equal voice. But archivists and historians have not historically had the role of designing their subjects' behaviors in the first place. The short of decentralizing the web and increasing data portability for true ownership of our data, I want to explore what can be done to restore and redistribute and democratize power for our memory amongst the collective.